Hello and welcome. My name is Silvia Pavoni, economics editor of The Bank, and I will be presenting the third in a series of 5 videos we are doing with HSBC titled Connecting to Growth. We're going to talk about Latin America today and investment opportunities in infrastructure. I'm joined by HSBC Global Head of Infrastructure, Arturo Recio, and the bank's Global Head of Infrastructure Finance, Stuart Lee. Now, Latin America as a region has really enjoyed quite healthy economic growth levels. This has been coupled with a more stable picture on the political side and on the macroeconomic side, but it has also meant that the region's infrastructure needs are becoming bigger and bigger, and we are closing on this infrastructure bottleneck, really, if we want to call it so. So what was behind the region's economic growth, and what opportunities lie ahead for the private sector in this space?
Well, I think in terms of the growth itself, it's coming very much from population growth. It's been in part driven by the resources aspects within the region. And I think it's also driven by a greater level of political stability within the key countries that are driving this growth. And I think that in looking at corporates, looking at banks, looking at investors, there is a very strong appetite to get involved in infrastructure. There's also a very strong linkage between expenditure on infrastructure and therefore economic growth. It's very much a facilitator of economic growth. And when these investors look at where to put their capital around the world, there's typically more capital than opportunities. And I think with less opportunities being apparent in the core markets of Australia, of Europe, perhaps of North America, I think it's been a virtuous circle of excess capacity to invest in infrastructure, and then separately this wonderful economic growth story in South America, and this improving framework for tenders, this improving political stability, and therefore we see it as a very good opportunity for matching investors' desire for long-term stable assets with a very strong demand locally within Latin America for infrastructure to be built.
So there are lots of opportunities, but are you also seeing the private sector, whether from Latin America or international investors, actually investing in the region?
Well, actually, the main issue here is that the needs of infrastructure are so great that potentially the local financing that was available, plus the local groups, which many of them are actually very credible, very professional conglomerates, I think now they need to be complemented by new equity. People that actually bring new fresh money in order to actually complete the projects. They bring new expertise to certain areas of the infrastructure world. So I think it's a combination of both in terms of need for more equity, more capital, and actually bigger and more complex projects as well. So I think that's the main, those are the main characteristics.
Where are you expecting this equity, this money to come from? From construction companies, from corporates, from institutional investors, from other kind of sources?
It's a combination of all of those. And I think that in looking at regions in which investors aren't based today, they are looking at all the factors in terms of a deal pipeline, stability of regulation and legal rights within contracts. And I think if they can see that pipeline of transactions, not just in one country, but in more than one country, they will use that to base themselves in the region and see that as a 5 to 10 year window for investing, rather than going on into the country for a specific project, a one-off and returning. So I think there is the development money locally, both within the development banks, both within the corporates locally, but to really drive that growth in infrastructure, as Arturo mentioned before, we need to also attract this capital source from outside of the region into the region to complement what's there already locally.
I think obviously traditional corporates such as the Spanish companies that actually have seen Latin America as their very important market, I think they've been complemented by other companies coming from Asia. They see very much an opportunity on the resources and energy, on the infrastructure in general. I think you see other investors on the infrastructure, financial investors, that they were thinking of Latin America as a potentially more of an unknown market. But given the opportunities in countries such as Mexico, Brazil, they're opening up their minds to actually this type of economies and opportunities. So you actually see a bigger number of potential investors in many of the transactions.
Very good. So we've set the scene for Latin America, its economic growth and potential, and we're now going to move on to specific projects that may be of interest.